So, when we think about how to write a paper two, there are three aspects that you have to focus on, and they're clearly shown to you in the rubric. You need to focus on your communication, on your knowledge and understanding, and on your application. Now, I think the one that you'll be most familiar with is just the communication. You'll be asked a question, and you need to focus clearly on that question. You should not try to answer a different question. You shouldn't try to be clever and pivot to a question that you've prepared better. You want to focus just directly on the question. Now, for the highest mark band, the IB asks that you have an awareness of the demands and implications of the question. So that usually involves taking it one step further and trying to figure out exactly the sort of depth that's being asked of you in the question. So if you're asked about, the long range causes of a war, clearly understanding the difference between long range and short range is an important piece of knowledge that you can show off when you're setting up your writing. Now, in terms of writing a well-structured and effectively organized essay, as a general rule, a 5-paragraph essay is going to get it done for you in a 45-minute time frame. So as long as you focus on those key ideas, which is you need to get your thesis out there in the first paragraph, you want each of your subsequent paragraphs 2, 3, and 4, to begin with a clear line of argument, something that someone can disagree with. Do not give a statement of fact to begin your second, third, or fourth paragraphs. When you're doing your introduction, that can be pretty tight. What you're really trying to do there is get to your thesis and show you know exactly what's being asked of you. We don't need a big, there are many wars that happen in human history, and one of the wars that I'm telling you about will be the Russo-Japanese War. You don't need to do this big bring in. You don't need to interest your reader particularly. All of us are being paid to read your work, so don't focus too much on hooking anybody. Focus on showing off a nuanced, synthetic thesis. And what I mean by a synthetic thesis is you're being asked a question that students will be able to answer either positively or negatively in some respect. Right? There is not only one answer to the question that you are being asked. So allow for some of that ambiguity and for some of that synthesis to come into your writing and your thesis. All right. We'll talk about sentence stems when we move on to historical concepts. But for now, let's think about having a thesis that might begin with the words although. All right. Not all theses need to begin with the word although, but although is a nice way to begin a thesis. Although X is true, Y is a better explanation. Something along those lines. All right. It can be a really nice synthetic thesis that then really clearly sets up what paragraphs 2, 3, and 4 will be about. Because paragraph 2 will be demonstrating a key strong idea for you. Paragraph 3 can come back and be the although, and then paragraph 4 can come back and be why is actually a better explanation. So that can be a nice structure. You don't have to follow that structure, but as a general rule, having your 3 body paragraphs be organized in such a way that 2 will strongly support your conclusion and 1 will be your critical analysis of a point that normally would disagree with yourself, so that you have 2 strong points that you've analyzed that end up falling on your side, and 1 point that maybe would be the best argument against your thesis, but even though there is some validity to it, you're still going to stick to your conclusion. Now, most of the studying and preparation that students do falls into the knowledge and understanding category. You want it to be accurate and relevant. Absolutely. You knew that coming into this class. Placing it in historical context is a nice way to show that you know that events don't just happen in isolation, that actually they have antecedents, they have causes, and so if you can place them in their actual historical presence, that can really show your reader that you understand some of the nuances of history. But in order to score in the highest mark band of knowledge and understanding, you have to have a clear understanding of historical concepts. That's absolutely required. So what I recommend you do then is I recommend you review your historical concepts. All right. And as we have our 6 historical concepts. And I consider a lot of them to be, well, sort of set up in opposition to one another. We have change and we have continuity. This is a great thing to talk about in NASA. At the end, what has changed because of the event and what has stayed the same. Some things have changed, but some things have stayed the same. All right. You may be asked about causation. This is a really easy one, especially when we're talking about war. You may be asked about the causes of the war, but you may also be asked about the consequences of the war. Overall, I would say that the IB's favorite thing to focus on is the significance of certain events. How important were they? Yes, they happened, but how important were they? All right. And finally, and we'll talk about this in our last section of the rubric, you have to demonstrate that different people see things different ways. And you have to demonstrate that you as a historian are able to see things different ways. So here we have the IB descriptions of each of the concepts. And here we have some questions here. All right. These are the sorts of questions that you can lead your reader towards in order to demonstrate that you're anchoring your work in historical concepts. But a really nice trick that I would recommend you use to demonstrate that you're engaging with these concepts is just to force yourself to. And there are a number of words that you can use in your work that are just going to force you to use the historical concepts. And I call these sentence stems. All right. If you're talking about change or causation or consequence, these sentence stems here can be really nice in terms of bringing your reader directly along. If you say because of, you're talking about the causation of something, right? If you're talking about consequently, you're talking about the consequence of something. Right? And so these sentence stems can be great things to internalize into your writing, because if you use them, you can't help but engage in these historical concepts. Continuity and perspectives. On the one hand, on the other hand, this is sort of the crown jewel of the perspective one. All right. Although I think I've demonstrated the one that I personally find the most useful in my life. Right? So still, there are others that you can use, right? We're just demonstrating here the perspectives that we're taking. We're looking at 2 different things and we are evaluating their significance. Here are some great words here that you can use to demonstrate that you're engaging critically with the significance of a concept. And so you can see these are just some. You can come up with more on your own, but those are my recommendations. That should give you a good understanding of how to do strong communication and how to handle your knowledge and understanding. When it comes to application, all right, by looking at perspectives, you're going to set yourself up really nicely for evaluation, all right, for allowing that 2 different things need to be combined together in order to get to the truth. So that can move you on well into this area right here. All right. Links and or comparisons. It's true, not all questions will require this, but almost all will. And comparing things can be really, really, really important in terms of situating them, not just in their historical context, which you already had to do for your knowledge and understanding, but also in terms of determining those big ideas, especially determining significance. How did this affect this group? And how did this affect this group? And linking them together with some other aspect of the question can be really, really helpful. Now, in order to get into the highest mark band, you have to evaluate different perspectives. And because it needs to be integrated effectively into the answer, as a general rule, that means you need to do this in at least 3 of your paragraphs, in paragraphs 2, 3, and 4. You need to engage with what 2 different groups of people think about the same piece of information. Some students do this by engaging specifically with historical schools. And as we get further and further into the class, you'll feel more and more comfortable referencing specific historians. At the beginning of your time, though, you really can just reference different possible interpretations of the same event. All right. People, just to take an example from the very beginning of our class, people can look at Bismarck as being an uncompromising Machiavellian strategist who pushed his way forward, through the Kulturkampf and made all the sorts of mistakes and through his anti-socialist legislation. Or we can view Bismarck as Bismarck himself wanted to be viewed, as a man who was just steering a course along the stream of time and who was just carefully navigating these things and going the way that the opportunity led him. Oh, those are two different perspectives on Bismarck. You can engage with them, and then you can ultimately land on either a synthesis of them. Bismarck was determined, but ultimately, when he saw he had failed, he became flexible. And then you can look at the Kulturkampf, for example. Or you can just choose one. So you don't have to synthesize, but you can. All right. And then obviously you're going to need to argue to a consistent conclusion, which will be paragraph 5. All right. That should take the information that you've shared with your reader and hammer home why your conclusion is correct. So those are the key steps, I would say, that you want to think about how to write a paper 2 before you've ever written a paper 2.